The history of lynching in post-Reconstruction America is horrific. There have been numerous recounts and stories of unjust lynchings in America, North and South, but no lynching comes close to the depravity of the lynching of Sam House. This is perhaps the worst lynching in the history of the United States. Sam House was born in 1875 in rural Georgia on a farm owned by the same family who enslaved his mother. He was described by those around him as a gentle and friendly man who possessed the knowledge on how to read and write, a rarity for African Americans in the rural South at the time. His mother became ill, and he had to quit his pursuits of a higher education to care for his aging mother. Sometime before 1899, Host changed his name and moved to Coweta County, Georgia. That year was a particularly violent year in the area. In March, 9 black men were lined up and shot dead by an armed vigilante group after being suspected of arson. But those murders pale in comparison to the gruesome murder that Host would have to endure. Host would work on a farm owned by the Cranford family, according to local newspapers. On April 12, 1899, the Cranfords were eating a meal at their home when Host allegedly killed Alfred Cranford with an axe, raped his wife, and threw their infant son to the floor. Host fled the area and went to Marshallville, Georgia, where his mother lived. The owner of the farm and his brother found Host and accompanied him on a train headed to Georgia, where a reward awaited for his arrest. $1,600 was the reward amount. Local newspapers described Host as a monster in human form and detailed what Host allegedly did to the family. At a train stop in Griffin, Georgia, Host was removed from the train at gunpoint by an angry mob. The mob of roughly 500 people quickly took Host to a wooded area before police could find him first and chained him to a tree. Host would be brutally tortured. The mob stripped him naked and cut his ears, fingers, and genitals off. The crowd each took turns plunging knives into Host's body, all while Host was screaming in pain. The suffering was only beginning. Host's entire face would be flayed off while he was continuously beaten. His face was later doused with kerosene and set on fire. The heat from the fire was so intense, witnesses recalled the veins on his body rupturing and his eyes nearly fell out of their sockets. Host slowly burned to death while the crowd cheered. His last words were reportedly, "Sweet Jesus." After he died, the mob began to dismember him and take body parts to keep as souvenirs. His heart was cut out and given away, and his liver was cut out as well. There was a sign attached to his remains that read, "We must protect our Southern women." Future Senator Rebecca Latimer remarked, "What happened to Host needed to happen, and he deserved less sympathy than a wild dog." Civil rights activist W.E.B. Du Bois was in Atlanta at the time and heard that Host's knuckles were for sale at a local grocery store and later learned that many of his body parts were being sold in stores all over Georgia. Civil rights activist Ida B. Wells hired a detective to investigate the lynching and the events that led up to it. They discovered that Host acted in self-defense against the Cranford family, particularly the husband. They also found no evidence that Alfred Cranford's wife had been raped by Host. The governor of Georgia, Allen Candler, blamed his lynching on African Americans, saying had they, quote, been raised right, lynchings like this would never happen. None of the 500 people who participated in this horrific torture and murder were ever arrested. Lynchings would continue for many decades in the United States until legislation would finally be passed.